Dorothy Washington had seen a lot in her 74 years. She'd lived through times when people like her weren't welcome in places like this. But today, as she pushed open the heavy glass door of Magnolia's restaurant, she felt nothing but joy. Her grandson was turning 16 and the whole family would be here soon to celebrate. The restaurant smelled like fresh bread and expensive perfume. Soft piano music played from hidden speakers, the kind of gentle melody that made you want to whisper instead of talk. Dorothy smoothed down her navy blue dress, the one with the pearl buttons she'd been saving for special occasions. She'd paired it with her good shoes and the gold earrings her late husband had given her on their 40th anniversary. A young woman at the front desk looked up with a practiced smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Washington. Party of 8 at 2 o'clock. "I'm a bit early, but I thought I'd make sure everything was set up properly." Dorothy's voice was warm but firm. After 40 years of teaching middle school, she knew how to speak with quiet authority. The hostess checked her computer screen and nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Washington, right this way." She led Dorothy through the dining room, past tables covered in white linens and sparkling silverware. The restaurant was about half full with the lunch crowd. Business people in suits talked over salads. A couple in the corner celebrated something with champagne. An older gentleman read his newspaper while picking at a sandwich. Dorothy noticed she was one of the few black faces in the room, but that didn't bother her anymore. She'd earned her place in the world, and she knew it. The hostess showed her to a large round table by the window, perfect for a family gathering. Sunlight streamed through the glass, making the silverware gleam. Dorothy could see the street outside where people walked by with shopping bags and coffee cups. "Your server will be right with you. Can I get you started with anything to drink?" "Just a cup of hot tea, please. Earl Grey, if you have it." Dorothy settled into her chair and pulled out her crossword puzzle book from her purse. She always carried one. It kept her mind sharp, she liked to say. She'd filled in about 3 words when a young waiter appeared with her tea, setting it down carefully on a small saucer. "Thank you, dear," she said, and he smiled before hurrying off to another table. Dorothy took a sip of tea and looked around the restaurant. She remembered the first time she'd eaten here. Must have been 1995 or so. Her husband, Robert, had brought her here for their anniversary. Back then, they'd gotten a few stares, a few raised eyebrows. The owner had been polite but cool. Times had changed since then, or so she thought. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to her daughter. "I'm here early. Got us the best table. Can't wait to see everyone." Her granddaughter, the one who worked at the news station, sent back a heart emoji and, "We're on our way, Grandma." Dorothy smiled and went back to her crossword. 7 down, dignity, 6 letters. She filled it in carefully, her handwriting still neat despite the slight tremor in her hands. Around her, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. Forks clinked against plates. Someone laughed at a nearby table. The piano music shifted to something jazzy. Dorothy felt peaceful. These were the moments she treasured now at her age. Simple moments. Family moments. The chance to watch her grandson blow out 16 candles and see the man he was becoming. She thought about what Robert would say if he could see their grandson now. Tall, smart, heading to college in 2 years. They'd come so far as a family. Her parents had picked cotton in Georgia. She'd become a teacher. Her daughter was a nurse. Her granddaughter was on television. Her grandson wanted to be an engineer. Dorothy took another sip of tea and glanced at her watch. 1:30. The family would start arriving around 1:45. Her daughter was always exactly 15 minutes early to everything. Dorothy had taught her that. "If you're on time, you're late," she used to say. The restaurant was getting busier now. More people came through the door. The hostess greeted them with that same professional smile. Dorothy noticed a group of 4 women walk in, all dressed in expensive workout clothes, the kind with designer labels. They clustered at the front desk, talking loudly about their tennis game. Dorothy couldn't hear everything they said, but their voices carried across the room. One of them, a woman with blonde hair and too much jewelry, seemed to be complaining about something. The hostess kept that smile on her face, but Dorothy could see the tension in her shoulders. 30 minutes? The blonde woman's voice rose above the music. "You're telling me we have to wait 30 minutes? The hostess said something Dorothy couldn't hear, probably apologizing, probably offering to call them when a table opened up. But the blonde woman wasn't satisfied. She put her hands on her hips and looked around the restaurant, as if searching for a solution to her problem. And then her eyes landed on Dorothy. Dorothy felt it before it happened. It was a feeling she'd learned to recognize over the years. That look, that calculation, the way someone's eyes could measure you up and decide you didn't matter as much as they did. The blonde woman said something to her friends, then started walking across the restaurant. Straight toward Dorothy's table. Dorothy set down her crossword puzzle and folded her hands in her lap. She'd been here before, not in this exact situation, but in 1,000 moments like it. Moments where someone decided she didn't belong. Moments where someone thought they could push her aside because of how she looked or how old she was, or because they simply believed their needs were more important than hers. The woman was getting closer now, weaving between tables, her friends trailing behind her, looking uncertain. Dorothy could see the determination in her walk. She took a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. She thought about her grandson, about the stories she'd told him about the old days, when water fountains had signs and certain doors weren't meant for certain people. She'd told him those stories not to make him angry, but to help him understand how far they'd come, how much progress they'd made. But she'd also taught him something else. She'd taught him that progress wasn't finished, that sometimes, even in nice restaurants in modern times, you still had to stand your ground. You still had to look someone in the eye and refuse to be moved. The blonde woman reached her table and stopped. Dorothy looked up at her calmly, her face showing nothing but polite curiosity. Inside, her heart was beating faster, but her hands stayed still in her lap. Her voice, when she spoke, would be steady. She'd faced down rowdy teenagers for 40 years. She'd buried a husband and raised a family and built a life despite every obstacle the world had thrown at her. This woman, whoever she was about to learn that Dorothy Washington didn't move for anyone. Not today. Not ever. The blonde woman stopped right in front of Dorothy's table. Up close, she looked to be in her mid-40s, with perfectly styled hair and a tennis bracelet that probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly pension. Her three friends hung back a few steps, looking uncomfortable. "Excuse me," the woman said, though her tone suggested she wasn't really asking to be excused for anything. "I need this table." Dorothy looked up at her calmly. "I'm sorry, but this table is reserved. My family will be arriving shortly." The woman's eyes narrowed. She glanced around the table, taking in Dorothy sitting alone, the empty chairs, the single cup of tea. "You're by yourself. We're a group of 4. It doesn't make sense for one person to take up a table this size when there are people waiting." Dorothy kept her voice level and polite. "As I said, my family is on their way. We have a reservation for 8 people at 2 o'clock. I arrived early to make sure everything was ready." "A reservation for 8? The woman's voice dripped with disbelief. She turned to her friends and let out a sharp laugh. "Did you hear that? A reservation for 8 people. One of her friends, a brunette in a pink visor, touched her arm gently. "Come on, Linda, let's just wait." "It's not that long," but Linda shook her off. She turned back to Dorothy, and something had shifted in her expression. Something uglier had surfaced. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to pull here, but I can see right through it. You're sitting here alone with a cup of tea, probably planning to nurse it for an hour. Meanwhile, actual paying customers have to wait." The words "actual paying customers" hung in the air like poison. Dorothy felt her chest tighten, but she'd been through worse than this. Much worse. She took a slow breath and met the woman's eyes directly. "I am a paying customer. I have a reservation. And I'm not moving." Linda's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. Where's the manager? Someone needs to do something about this." Her voice had gotten loud enough that people at nearby tables were turning to look. The piano music seemed quieter now, or maybe everyone was just listening. Dorothy could feel eyes on her from all directions. Some curious, some sympathetic, some just wanting to see what would happen next. A young man in a white shirt and black tie appeared, moving quickly between the tables. He couldn't have been more than 25, with nervous eyes and sweat already forming on his forehead. A name tag identified him as the manager on duty. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, looking between Dorothy and Linda. Linda jumped in before Dorothy could speak. "No, everything is not all right. I've been told there's a 30-minute wait for a table. Meanwhile, this woman is sitting here alone taking up a table for 8 people. It's completely unreasonable." The young manager turned to Dorothy. "Ma'am, do you have a reservation?" "Yes, under Washington, for 2 o'clock. Party of 8. He pulled out a small tablet and scrolled through it. Dorothy could see him find her name, see the confirmation cross his face. But then he looked at the situation in front of him. one elderly black woman sitting, alone, and four well-dressed white women, one of whom was making a scene loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Well," he said slowly, "technically the reservation isn't until 2 o'clock, and you are currently sitting alone at the table." Dorothy's stomach dropped. She could see where this was going. "Are you seriously suggesting she should give up her table?" Linda jumped on the opening like a shark smelling blood. "Because that's exactly what needs to happen here. This is a nice establishment. People shouldn't be allowed to just camp out taking up space." "Now, I'm not saying anyone needs to give up anything," the manager stammered. "I'm just saying maybe we could work out a compromise. Perhaps this lady could wait at the bar until her party arrives and then—" "No." Dorothy's voice cut through his rambling like a knife. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Every student she'd ever taught would have recognized that tone. "I will not be moved to the bar. I will not give up this table. I have a reservation. I arrived when I chose to arrive, and I am staying right here." Linda leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "Do you even understand how much meals cost here? Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Be honest. You're probably just sitting here for the free bread and water." The insult was so blatant, so openly ugly, that several people nearby gasped. Dorothy heard someone at the next table whisper, "Oh my God, she did not just say that." Dorothy's hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded in her lap. She thought about her 40 years in the classroom. She thought about the time a parent had come in, red-faced and angry, insisting Dorothy was too strict on their child, suggesting maybe she wasn't qualified to teach. She thought about the principal who'd quietly advised her not to make waves when she reported discrimination. She thought about every single time someone had looked at her and seen only her skin color, only her age, only their own prejudices. And she thought about Robert, her late husband, who used to tell her, "Dorothy, you're the strongest person I know. Don't ever let anyone make you small." "I've been eating at this restaurant since before you probably knew it existed," Dorothy said quietly. "I know the original owner. I've celebrated anniversaries here, birthdays here, promotions here. I taught school in this community for 40 years. I have every right to be here, and I'm not going anywhere." Linda straightened up and turned to the manager. "Are you going to handle this, or do I need to call the police? Because I will. This is harassment. She's clearly unstable, probably senile. For all we know, she doesn't even have a family coming. She could be dangerous." "Dangerous?" Dorothy almost laughed. "I'm a 74-year-old woman drinking tea." "You're making a scene and refusing to cooperate with reasonable requests," Linda shot back. "If you were really a respectable person, you'd understand why this is a problem. But instead, you're being difficult, and honestly, people like you—" She stopped herself, but everyone heard what she didn't say. The words hung in the air anyway, invisible, but understood. The young manager looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Maybe we should all just calm down and—" "Don't tell me to calm down," Linda snapped. "I want this situation resolved now. Either she moves, or I'm calling the police and corporate. I know the owner of this restaurant. One phone call and—" "Then make your call," Dorothy interrupted, reaching for her purse. "Because I'm about to make one of my own." She pulled out her phone with steady hands. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent now. Even the piano music seemed to have stopped, though maybe it was still playing and no one could hear it over the pounding tension in the room. Linda crossed her arms. "Who exactly do you think you're calling, your imaginary family?" Dorothy didn't answer. She unlocked her phone and scrolled to a number she had on speed dial. Her granddaughter. The one who worked at the television station. The one who'd been texting her just 20 minutes ago saying she was nearby covering a story downtown. Dorothy pressed call and brought the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. "Hey, Grandma, we're almost—" "Sweetheart," Dorothy said calmly, her eyes never leaving Linda's face. "I'm at Magnolia's restaurant on King Street. There's a situation happening here that I think you need to know about. Can you come now?" There was a pause on the other end. Then her granddaughter's voice changed, becoming sharper, more focused. "Are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm fine, baby. Just fine. But yes, I think you should come. Bring your camera crew if they're with you. We're 5 minutes away, don't move. We're coming. Dorothy ended the call and placed her phone gently on the table. She looked up at Linda, who was staring at her with a mixture of confusion and contempt. My granddaughter is on her way, Dorothy said simply. She works in television. I think she'll be very interested in what's been happening here today. Linda scoffed. Your granddaughter works in television? Sure she does. Let me guess, she's a famous reporter who's going to save the day? Dorothy just smiled. It was a small smile, sad and knowing. You'll see soon enough. The manager shifted nervously. Maybe we should all just wait and… I'm not waiting for anything, Linda announced. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling the police right now. We'll see whose story they believe. And as she started dialing, Dorothy sat quietly at her table, her hands folded, her tea growing cold, and watched the storm continue to build around her. Outside the window, a black SUV was turning onto King Street, heading their way. The next 5 minutes felt like an hour. Dorothy sat at her table, hands still folded, while Linda paced near the hostess stand, talking loudly on her phone. The young manager hovered nearby, looking like he wished he'd called in sick that day. Linda's 3 friends had taken seats at the bar, whispering to each other and occasionally glancing over with embarrassed expressions. Around the restaurant, people weren't even pretending not to watch anymore. An older gentleman at a nearby table had his phone out, clearly recording. A young couple had stopped eating their lunch entirely, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The hostess kept trying to seat new customers, but everyone seemed more interested in the drama unfolding than in their menus. Dorothy took another sip of her now cold tea. She could feel her heart beating fast in her chest, but she kept her face calm. This wasn't her first rodeo, as her grandson liked to say. She'd faced down angry parents, hostile administrators, and her share of prejudice over 7 decades. But it never got easier. Every single time still hurt. Linda snapped her phone shut and marched back over. The police are on their way. They said they'd send an officer to handle this disturbance. I haven't disturbed anything, Dorothy said quietly. I'm sitting at my reserved table waiting for my family. You're trespassing and causing a scene, Linda shot back. And when the police get here, they'll see exactly what's happening. An elderly woman, clearly confused, taking up space and refusing to cooperate with staff. One of Linda's friends, the brunette in the pink visor, finally stood up from the bar and walked over. Linda, please. This has gone too far. Let's just wait for a different table. It's really not. Stay out of this, Christine, Linda snapped. This is about principle. People need to understand there are rules. You can't just do whatever you want because you think you're entitled to special treatment. Dorothy almost laughed at that. Special treatment. She'd spent her entire life watching other people get special treatment while she had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, but she didn't say any of that. She just waited. The manager cleared his throat. Mrs. Washington, perhaps while we're waiting, I could get you some fresh tea, or maybe some bread. It was a peace offering, Dorothy knew. A small gesture that said, he knew this was wrong but didn't have the courage to stop it. She felt sorry for him, actually. He was young and scared and probably underpaid, but that didn't excuse him from doing the right thing. No, thank you, she said politely. I'm fine as I am. Linda checked her watch dramatically. Where is this supposed granddaughter of yours? Making quite an entrance, isn't she? Or maybe she doesn't exist at all. Dorothy didn't respond. She looked out the window instead, watching the street. Cars passed by. People walked past with shopping bags and coffee cups, completely unaware of what was happening inside this restaurant. Living their normal Friday afternoon lives while Dorothy sat here, once again having to prove she belonged somewhere. Then she saw it. The black SUV pulling up to the curb right in front of the restaurant. Her heart lifted. The driver's side door opened first, and Dorothy's granddaughter stepped out. Jessica Washington was 28 years old, dressed in a sharp gray suit with her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. She moved with purpose, the kind of confidence Dorothy had worked hard to instill in all her grandchildren. But Jessica wasn't alone. Two other people climbed out of the SUV. One carried a professional video camera. The other had a microphone with the Channel 7 News logo clearly visible. They were in full news crew mode, equipment at the ready. Dorothy watched Linda's face as she noticed the news van. Confusion flickered across her features, then dismissal. She probably thought they were there for something else entirely. The restaurant door opened and Jessica walked in, followed by her crew. She scanned the room quickly and her eyes locked on Dorothy. Dorothy saw her granddaughter's expression change, the professional mask slipping for just a moment to show worry and anger, before snapping back into place. Jessica walked straight to Dorothy's table, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The entire restaurant watched. The cameraman was filming everything, the footage rolling. "Grandma," Jessica said, leaning down to kiss Dorothy's cheek. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, baby," Dorothy said, patting her hand. "Just a little misunderstanding." Jessica straightened up and turned to face the room. Her eyes swept across the scene. Linda standing there with her arms crossed. The nervous manager, the friends at the bar, the watching crowd. "My name is Jessica Washington," she announced, her voice clear and professional. "I'm an investigative reporter with Channel 7 News. This is my grandmother, Dorothy Washington." Linda's face went pale. Dorothy watched the realization dawn slowly, like watching someone step into quicksand and understand too late what they'd done. "Your grandmother works in television?" Linda's voice had lost some of its confidence. "No," Jessica corrected. "My grandmother is a retired school teacher who taught in this community for 40 years. I'm the one who works in television, and I'd very much like to know what's been happening here." The manager stepped forward, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "There's been a small disagreement about seating arrangements. Nothing serious, nothing serious." Jessica's eyebrows rose. She looked at Dorothy. "Grandma, tell me what happened, everything." Dorothy took a breath and told the story. She spoke calmly, without embellishment, just stating the facts. How she'd arrived early for her family's reservation. How Linda had demanded she give up the table. How she'd been accused of not being able to afford to eat there, of camping out for free food, of being confused or senile or dangerous. With each sentence, Linda's face grew paler. Her friends at the bar looked horrified. The manager seemed to be calculating how much trouble he was in. When Dorothy finished, Jessica turned to her cameraman. "Did you get all of that?" He nodded, every word. "Plus, we've got footage from when we walked in." Jessica pulled out her own phone. "And I'm guessing, based on the number of people I saw with their phones out, that there's probably more footage floating around already. Would anyone who recorded any of this be willing to share it with our news station?" At least 5 hands went up around the restaurant. One man called out, "I got the whole thing from the beginning. Sent it to my wife already, but I can send it to you too." "Thank you," Jessica said. She turned back to Linda, and her expression was all business now. No anger, no emotion. Just a reporter doing her job. "And you are?" Linda's mouth opened and closed. I don't have to tell you anything." "That's true," Jessica agreed. "But I'm going to run this story. It's already news. Elderly black woman harassed in local restaurant. Manager fails to intervene and it's all caught on camera. I can run it with your name or without it. But people will figure out who you are either way. The internet's pretty good at that." Christine, the friend in the pink visor, stood up. "Her name is Linda Ashford. She's a realtor with Prestige Properties. And for the record, we tried to get her to stop." "We told her to leave it alone." "Shut up, Christine," Linda hissed, but Christine shook her head. "No, I'm not going to be part of this. What you did was wrong. What you said was disgusting, Mrs. Washington. I'm so sorry. This shouldn't have happened." She grabbed her purse and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Linda standing there. The other 2 friends exchanged glances and followed, abandoning Linda completely. Jessica made a note on her phone. "Linda Ashford with Prestige Properties. Thank you." At that moment, the restaurant owner appeared from the back office. He was an older Asian man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit. He took one look at the scene, the news cameras, Jessica standing protectively by Dorothy, Linda looking trapped, the manager sweating bullets, and his face went white. "What is going on in my restaurant?" he demanded. Jessica turned to him. "And you are?" "William Chen, I own this restaurant. Someone called me and said there was a situation." "There is," Jessica confirmed. "Your staff allowed my grandmother to be harassed and suggested she give up her reserved table. Do you know Dorothy Washington?" William looked at Dorothy and his expression changed completely. Mrs. Washington? Dorothy? Dorothy gave him a small smile. Hello, William. It's been a while. You know her? The young manager squeaked. Know her? William moved quickly to Dorothy's table. Mrs. Washington was my 10th grade English teacher. She's the reason I got into college. Mrs. Washington, I am so deeply sorry. If I had known you were here, if I had any idea this was happening. He turned to the young manager with fury in his eyes. You allowed someone to harass a guest? A guest with a reservation? You suggested she give up her table? The manager stammered something incoherent. William wasn't listening. He turned to Linda. You. Out. Now. You're banned from this restaurant. Don't ever come back. Linda's jaw dropped. You can't. I own this restaurant. I absolutely can. Leave now before I have you escorted out. Linda looked around wildly, searching for support, for sympathy, for anything. But every face in the restaurant was either angry or indifferent. She grabbed her designer purse and rushed toward the door, practically running. As the door swung shut behind her, the restaurant erupted in applause. Dorothy felt her eyes fill with tears, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry, not here. Not now. Jessica squeezed her shoulder. You okay, Grandma? I'm fine, sweetheart. Dorothy looked up at her granddaughter with pride. Thank you for coming. Always, Jessica said fiercely. Always. William was still apologizing, promising free meals, promising changes. But Dorothy was watching the door where the rest of her family was just starting to arrive for the birthday celebration. Her daughter walked in first, saw the cameras, saw Dorothy, and her face filled with concern. Mom, what happened? Dorothy smiled. Nothing I couldn't handle, baby. Come sit down. We've got a birthday to celebrate. The birthday celebration went on, but it wasn't quite the same. Dorothy's daughter, Patricia, kept glancing at her mother with worried eyes. Her grandson, the birthday boy named Tyler, sat next to her looking confused and angry. The rest of the family had arrived. Dorothy's son David with his wife, 2 more grandchildren, and Patricia's husband, and they'd all gotten the quick version of what happened. Jessica's camera crew had packed up and left, but Jessica stayed for the meal. She sat next to Dorothy, and every few minutes her phone would buzz. She'd glance at it, type something quickly, then set it down again. It's already spreading, Jessica said quietly to Dorothy while the waiter was taking everyone's orders. Someone posted their video on social media about 20 minutes ago. It's got 50,000 views already. Dorothy felt her stomach twist. That fast? That's how it works these days, Grandma. By tomorrow morning, it'll probably have millions. I don't want to be famous, Dorothy said. I just wanted to have a nice lunch with my family. Jessica took her hand. I know, but maybe something good can come from this. People need to see this stuff still happens. They need to know it's not all in the past. William Chen had personally overseen their meal, sending out extra appetizers, insisting the entire lunch was complimentary, apologizing every time he passed the table. The young manager had disappeared into the back and hadn't been seen since. Dorothy almost felt bad for him. Almost. Tyler, who'd been quiet through most of the meal, finally spoke up. Grandma, I don't understand. Why did that lady think she could just take your table? Dorothy looked at her grandson. He was 16, tall and lanky, with his whole life ahead of him. She wanted to protect him from these truths, but she also knew he needed to hear them. Some people, she said carefully, grow up thinking the world belongs to them more than it belongs to others. They think their needs matter more. And sometimes when they see someone who doesn't look like them, they make assumptions. You mean because you're black, Tyler said bluntly. That's part of it, yes. And because I'm old. And because I was sitting alone. She looked at me and decided I didn't deserve to be here. But that's stupid, Tyler said, his voice rising. You've lived here your whole life. You taught half the people in this city. You have more right to be here than she does. Rights aren't about who deserves them more, baby. Rights are rights. Everyone gets them equally, or they're not really rights at all. Dorothy squeezed his hand. But I appreciate you being upset on my behalf. David, Dorothy's son, had been quiet through the meal, but now he spoke up. He was a lawyer, usually measured and careful with his words. Mom, you could file a complaint. Against the restaurant, against that woman for harassment. What she said to you, what the manager allowed to happen. There could be legal consequences. Dorothy shook her head. I don't want to spend my remaining years in courtrooms, baby. I just want to live my life. But if you don't hold them accountable, the world is holding her accountable, Jessica interrupted. holding up her phone. Linda Ashford's real estate license number is already circulating online. People have found her company's Facebook page, her personal Instagram. Someone dug up her LinkedIn. By morning, her entire life is going to be public record. Patricia frowned. Is that right, though? I mean, what she did was awful, but does she deserve to have her whole life destroyed? She did this to herself, Jessica said firmly. Nobody forced her to harass Grandma. Nobody made her say those things. She chose to do it in public, in front of witnesses, and now she's facing the consequences of that choice. I just hope she learned something from it, Dorothy said quietly. That's all I've ever wanted as a teacher. For people to learn, to be better tomorrow than they were today. The family finished their meal, and Tyler blew out the candles on the chocolate cake William had personally delivered to the table. They sang happy birthday, took photos, and tried to recapture the joy the day was supposed to hold. But something had shifted. The celebration felt fragile now, like glass that had already cracked. As they were getting ready to leave, a woman approached from another table. She was probably in her 50s, white, with gray streaks in her brown hair. She looked nervous. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Mrs. Washington? I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened to you today. I saw the whole thing and I should have said something. I should have stood up for you, but I just sat here. I'm ashamed of myself." Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. "What's your name, dear?" Helen Morrison." "Well, Helen Morrison, you're saying something now. That counts for something." Dorothy stood up and took the woman's hand. "Next time, maybe you'll be braver. That's all any of us can do. Try to be braver next time." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. And happy birthday to your grandson." She hurried back to her table, wiping her eyes. Dorothy watched her go and felt a small spark of hope. Maybe some good would come from this after all. Outside the restaurant, the family gathered on the sidewalk. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. Jessica was on her phone coordinating with her news station about the evening broadcast. "Grandma, we want to do an interview with you. Just a short one, maybe 5 minutes. Tell your side of the story properly. Not through social media clips and speculation. Would you be willing?" Dorothy hesitated. She'd always been private, never sought attention. But she thought about Tyler, about all the young people who might see this and think it was normal or think they deserved to be treated that way. "All right," she said, "but I want to do it at home. Not here. We can do that. I'll come by tomorrow morning if that's okay." Dorothy nodded. She was suddenly exhausted, bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with her age and everything to do with the weight of the day. Patricia drove her home, and Tyler insisted on coming too. They helped her into her small house, the one she'd lived in for 43 years since before Robert died. The house where she'd raised her children, where she'd graded thousands of papers at the kitchen table, where life had happened in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Tyler made her tea while Patricia fussed over her, bringing her slippers and her reading glasses and asking if she needed anything else. Dorothy sat in her favorite chair, the one by the window where the afternoon light came through just right. "I'm fine," she assured them. "Really, I'm tougher than I look." "We know you are, Mom," Patricia said. "But you shouldn't have to be." After they left, Dorothy sat alone in the quiet house. She picked up her phone and saw she had dozens of messages. Friends from church, former students, people she hadn't heard from in years, all expressing outrage on her behalf, offering support, sharing their own stories of discrimination. One message stood out. It was from a former student named Raymond Baker. She remembered him, a quiet boy who'd struggled with reading until she'd spent her lunch hours working with him. One-on-one. "Mrs. Washington," the message read, "I saw what happened today and it made me sick. You changed my life. You saw something in me nobody else did. You made me believe I could go to college when everyone else said I'd end up in jail or dead. I'm a teacher now because of you. I teach the way you taught me, with dignity, with respect, with the belief that every single person matters. I'm sorry the world still hasn't learned what you tried to teach it. But some of us did, and we're trying to pass it on." Dorothy read the message 3 times, tears streaming down her face. This was why she'd done it. Why she'd taught for 40 years despite the low pay and the lack of respect and the constant struggle. Because of boys like Raymond who became men, who became teachers, who carried the torch forward. She set down her phone and looked at the photo on her mantel. Robert in his army uniform, young and strong and full of hope. She'd taken that picture 62 years ago before they were married, before they knew what the world would throw at them. "We did good, didn't we?" she whispered to the photo. "With the kids, with the grandkids, with all those students. We tried to make things better." The photo didn't answer, but she could hear Robert's voice in her head anyway. "We did real good, Dorothy. And we're not done yet." Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a news alert. Local realtor under fire after viral video shows. Restaurant confrontation. She clicked on it and saw Linda Ashford's professional headshot next to a screenshot from someone's phone video. The article said Prestige Properties had released a statement. Linda Ashford was no longer employed with their company, effective immediately. They apologized to Dorothy and to the community and stated that her behavior did not reflect their values. Dorothy closed the article. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. She just felt tired, but she also felt something else, a small flicker of satisfaction. Not because Linda had lost her job. Dorothy didn't wish that kind of hardship on anyone. But because the world had said clearly and loudly that what happened was wrong, that Dorothy mattered, that elderly black women sitting in restaurants mattered, that dignity wasn't negotiable. She finished her tea and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring more attention, more interviews, more people wanting to hear her story, but tonight she just wanted to sleep. As she climbed into bed, her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Tyler. "Love you, Grandma. You're my hero. Always have been." Dorothy smiled in the darkness and typed back, "Love you too, baby. Happy birthday." Then she closed her eyes and let the day finally end. Dorothy woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. She reached for it and saw 43 missed calls and over 200 text messages. Her inbox was flooded with emails from news outlets, radio stations, even a few morning talk shows. She set the phone back down and got out of bed slowly. Her joints were stiff the way they always were these days. She made her way to the kitchen and started the coffee pot, going through her normal Saturday morning routine. Outside her window, she could see Mrs. Chen from next door watering her garden, and Mr. Patterson walking his dog like he did every day at 7:30. Life went on. That's what Dorothy had learned over 74 years. No matter what happened, no matter how big or small, life always went on. Jessica arrived at 9 o'clock with her camera crew. They set up in Dorothy's living room, moving the coffee table aside to make room for the lights and equipment. Dorothy had put on a nice blouse, the coral-colored one her daughter had given her for Christmas, and she'd taken extra care with her appearance. Not for vanity, but because she knew this interview would be seen by thousands, maybe millions of people. "You ready, Grandma?" Jessica asked, clipping a small microphone to Dorothy's collar. "As ready as I'll ever be." The camera started rolling. Jessica sat across from Dorothy, professional but warm. "Mrs. Dorothy Washington, thank you for talking with us today. Can you tell us in your own words what happened yesterday at Magnolia's restaurant?" Dorothy took a breath and told the story again. But this time she didn't just talk about Linda Ashford, or the young manager, or the confrontation. She talked about context, about history, about the decades she'd lived through and the changes she'd seen and the changes that still needed to happen. "I taught school for 40 years, she said, looking directly at the camera. "I taught children of every color, every background, every situation you can imagine. And the one thing I tried to teach them all was that every human being deserves dignity, not because of what they own or where they come from or what they look like, but simply because they're human." "Do you think the woman who confronted you will learn from this experience?" Jessica asked. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "I hope so. I truly do. I don't wish her harm. I don't want her life destroyed. But I do hope she takes this moment to look inside herself and ask why she thought it was acceptable to treat another person that way. And I hope other people who watch that video ask themselves the same question. What would you say to people who think incidents like this are rare? That racism and discrimination aren't really problems anymore?" Dorothy almost laughed. "I'd say they're not paying attention. Or maybe they're just lucky enough not to experience it themselves. But I'll tell you something. Yesterday wasn't the first time something like that happened to me. It probably won't be the last. The difference is that yesterday someone was recording. Yesterday people paid attention. But these little moments of disrespect, these assumptions about who belongs and who doesn't, they happen every single day to people who look like me. The interview lasted about 20 minutes. When it was over, Jessica hugged her tight. That was perfect, Grandma. Really perfect. When will it air? Tonight on the 6 o'clock news. But I'll post clips on social media this afternoon. I think your message needs to get out there as soon as possible. After Jessica and the crew left, Dorothy sat alone in her living room. The house felt too quiet. She thought about calling Patricia or David, but they had their own lives, their own Saturday plans. She didn't want to be a burden. Instead, she decided to do something she hadn't done in weeks. She went to her closet and pulled out her old photo albums, the ones she'd been meaning to digitize for years but never got around to. She carried them to her chair by the window and started flipping through the pages. There was Robert on their wedding day, so handsome in his suit. There was baby Patricia, all chubby cheeks and bright eyes. There was David's kindergarten graduation, Dorothy at her classroom door on the first day of school, year after year, watching the fashions change and her hair turn gray, but the smile staying the same. There were photos of students, too. Class pictures, field trip photos. The year her class put on a production of A Raisin in the Sun, and the local paper had covered it. She traced her finger over the faces, remembering names, remembering stories. A knock on the door interrupted her memories. She wasn't expecting anyone. She got up slowly and peered through the peephole. William Chen stood on her porch holding a large paper bag. She opened the door. William? What are you doing here? Mrs. Washington, I wanted to apologize again in person. And I brought you some food from the restaurant. I know yesterday's meal was probably ruined by everything that happened. Dorothy invited him in. They sat at her kitchen table while he unpacked containers of food, fresh pastries, a quiche, fruit salad, and her favorite Earl Grey tea. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, I did. William's face was serious. Mrs. Washington, I've been thinking about yesterday all night. About how that could have happened in my restaurant. About how my manager didn't protect you the way he should have. He was young and scared, Dorothy said. I don't blame him. Maybe not, but I do. I've already let him go, and I've scheduled training for the entire staff on how to handle situations like that. But more than that, I wanted to thank you. Thank me. For what? For being the teacher who believed in me when nobody else did. Do you remember? 10th grade, I was failing English. You kept me after class one day and asked me what was going on. I told you my father wanted me to drop out and work in his restaurant full-time. You told me I was too smart for that I could do both if I wanted to. Dorothy smiled. I remember. You wrote an essay about your father's journey from China. It was beautiful. You helped me get into college. You wrote my recommendation letter. You came to my graduation. William's voice cracked. Everything I have, everything I've built started because you saw something in me. And yesterday in my restaurant, someone treated you like you were nothing. I can never make that right, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying. After William left, Dorothy felt lighter somehow. The day continued to unfold in unexpected ways. More former students stopped by. Some she remembered clearly, others whose faces had faded in her memory, but whose names came back as they talked. They brought flowers, cards, food, stories about how she'd changed their lives. By evening, her small house was full of people. Patricia and David had come with their families. Some of Dorothy's friends from church had stopped by. Tyler and his friends were in the kitchen eating pizza, and the living room was crowded with former students, some now in their 50s and 60s themselves, sharing memories. Someone turned on the television at 6 o'clock to watch the news. There was Dorothy on the screen, looking dignified and composed, telling her story. The room fell silent as everyone watched. When it was over, Raymond Baker, the former student who'd sent her that message, raised his glass of lemonade. To Mrs. Washington, the woman who taught us that dignity isn't something anyone can take away from you. You have to give it away, and she never did. Everyone raised their glasses. To Mrs. Washington, Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. You're all making me feel very old with all this fussing. You are old, Grandma, Tyler said with a grin. But you're also kind of a superhero. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine. Dorothy looked around her living room at all these faces. Her children, her grandchildren, her former students who'd become doctors and teachers and business owners and parents themselves. This was her legacy, not the viral video or the news interview or the justice served to Linda Ashford. These people, these lives she'd touched. Her phone buzzed again. She almost ignored it. But Jessica grabbed it and looked at the screen. Her eyes went wide. "Grandma, the mayor wants to give you an award. The Community Impact Award. There's going to be a ceremony next month." Dorothy shook her head. "I don't need an award. I was just sitting in a restaurant." "No," Patricia said firmly. "You were standing up for yourself. For all of us. For everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere. That matters, Mom. Let them honor you." Dorothy looked at her daughter, then at her son, then at all the faces around her. She thought about Linda Ashford, wondering where she was tonight, what she was feeling. She hoped the woman was learning something, growing, changing. That was all Dorothy had ever wanted from anyone, the willingness to learn and grow and be better. "All right," she said finally, "I'll accept the award. But only if Raymond gives the introduction speech. He was one of my best students, after all." Raymond laughed. "It would be my honor, Mrs. Washington." The party continued into the evening. Someone brought out Dorothy's old record player and put on some Motown. Tyler tried to teach his younger cousins how to do the twist, getting the steps all wrong but making everyone laugh. Patricia and David danced together like they used to when they were kids. Dorothy sat in her chair and watched it all. This was life. The good and the bad, the painful and the joyful, all mixed together. Yesterday had been hard. Tomorrow might be hard too, but tonight was beautiful. As people started to leave, Tyler came over and kissed her cheek. "Happy birthday to me, right? I got the coolest grandma in the world." "Your birthday was yesterday, baby." "I know, but this feels like a celebration too. Like we're celebrating you." After everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, Dorothy stood at her window looking out at the street. The street lights had come on, casting yellow pools of light on the sidewalk. Somewhere out there, life was continuing. People were having dinner, watching television, putting their children to bed. The world turned on, and Dorothy Washington, 74 years old, retired teacher, grandmother, survivor, stood in her window and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not just satisfaction or justice or vindication, but hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, things were getting better. Slowly, painfully, but better. She thought about all those years in the classroom, all those students, all those lessons about dignity and respect and standing up for what's right. Maybe they'd been listening after all. Maybe the seeds she'd planted were finally growing into something beautiful. Dorothy closed the curtains and got ready for bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose between bitterness and grace. But tonight she could rest easy knowing she'd done what she always tried to do. She'd stood her ground. She'd kept her dignity. And she'd taught one more lesson to a world that still needed teaching. And that, Dorothy thought as she closed her eyes, was enough.